respect, and cooperation among people of all faiths. Their vision was founded on the conviction that Christians, Muslims, and neighbors of other faith traditions in their co-humanity created by and responsible before God are called to know, respect, and learn from one another, despite or even because of our differences. They do a lot of programs around the Chicago area. And now with our new Zoom world, their events have, like ours, gone nationwide and have had a wider audience. So if you're watching this and you're interested, feel free to check them out at ccme.lstc.edu to find a calendar of their events. I also want to give a shout out to Jewish Life at DePaul University for promoting this event to their students as well. So we're really excited to have a good interfaith contribution for this really important and timely program. I would now like to introduce our speakers. We have with us, we're so honored to have with us the filmmaker of American Muslim, Adam Zucker. He's an independent filmmaker and editor. He's an award-winning editor and has cut dozens of feature documentaries on issues of social justice, civil rights, environmental concerns, American history, and many other subjects. He's worked with a range of directors, including Rory Kennedy, Barbara Koppel, Ken Burns, Sidney Pollack, and Dory Bernstein. Among the 4 films he edited with Bernstein is 2011's award-winning Carol Channing, Larger Than Life, a chronicle of the recently passed Broadway icon. He is also the producer of The Return, about 4 young women in Poland discovering their long-forgotten Jewish roots, and Greensboro, Closer to the Truth, about the first Truth and Reconciliation Commission held in the United States. You can read more about Adam's incredible award-winning contributions on our website, where you can find his full bio. We're so honored and happy to have you with us, Adam. It is also my distinct pleasure to introduce one of our own, the notable Dr. Shabana Mir. Shabana Mir is Associate Professor of Anthropology and Director of Undergraduate Studies at American Islamic College. She teaches Islamic Studies, Gender Studies, Research Methods, Anthropology, Social Sciences, and Muslim American and Muslim World Literature. She's the author of the award-winning book, Muslim American Women on Campus, Undergraduate Social Life and Identity, published by the University of North Carolina Press. The book has received the Outstanding Book Award from the National Association for Ethnic Studies and the Critics' Choice Award from the American Educational Studies Association. She is an international public speaker on gender, religion, education, and politics. She speaks English, Urdu, and Punjabi, and some Arabic and Farsi. So grateful to have you both with us this evening to guide our discussion. So let's begin. We'll take questions in the chat box, which I will help guide through towards the end of the program. But we'd love to hear from you, Adam, and Dr. Shabana will help moderate some of that conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Romana. And I sound like a very busy person when you introduce me. I sound like I've done all kinds of things and I do all kinds of things. I suppose that's true, but I'm just listening to you talk about Adam's films. I want to actually check out the others as well now. I watched American Muslim, and it's a fascinating film. If any of you have not seen it yet, please do take time to watch the film. It is a very interesting film, and it's also really powerful as an ethnographic film. So I want to talk about a few things related to this film and kind of bring out some of the story of that film in conversation with Adam. So I guess my first question to you, Adam, is something I've been thinking about. How did you come to the point of making this film?
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here and speaking with you all. And thank you to Romana for making this happen and for joining me here. How did I make this film? The answer is actually pretty simple. It's 2 words, Donald Trump. And I kind of made a point never to say his name again, but all kidding aside, in the 2016 election, but even more than that, the campaign leading up to it, there were just things happening that I just found completely unacceptable. I mean, the targeting of religious minorities and all other kinds of people was just startling to me. I mean, it really was. And then when the election happened, I was, like most people I know, devastated. We're talking about 4 years ago. And I mean, I'm Jewish. I feel I'm third generation Jewish American. I feel perfectly safe here. But I think there were a lot of people that were not so safe here and people that were much more vulnerable than I was. And a couple of days after the election, when I was just, again, like most people I know, just really lost, there was a Muslim Jewish sharing circle at a nearby synagogue that I went to. And we were talking about our feelings and hearing each other and all that. And someone got up to speak from the Muslim community talking about, this is November 2016, about how people were, in certain neighborhoods in New York City, people were being said, this is Trump country now, you're gonna have to leave. And women were being yelled at on the street for wearing hijab and other things. And it was just really upsetting to me. And that person was Dr. Debbie Almontazer, who I knew of, but I never met. And I just felt like I had to try to do something. I had to try to make a film. I had to try to tell a story. And I'd be the first to say, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was embarrassed at the moment, that I'm a lifelong New Yorker, been here my entire life, most diverse city in America, we can assume. And I didn't know any Muslim people personally. I'd interacted with, I dealt with, but there was no one in my phone, no contacts. And I was embarrassed. I said, well, if I want to try to tell a story, I have to get to know people better. And I will say that I probably knew more about Islam than most non-Muslims, but that's just because I'm interested in religion and I read, that's all. Right. I had been in a mosque, but I didn't really know the 500,000 Muslims that live in New York City. So I set out to kind of get to know my neighbors. And also I should say that it wasn't a case of, oh, I'm going to come in and help save people. No one needed any saving here. Everyone was perfectly capable of speaking for themselves. I needed to add my voice to a conversation that I hoped we'd all be having. And I wasn't ever, and I was very conscious about not speaking for other people and not representing people. I was kind of an observer, I would say, a compassionate observer. And I kind of embrace filmmaking like that. It's a little bit like cultural anthropology, something for which I'm an outsider, but I can kind of observe. And I've been in situations when the film is finished in Muslim American groups, and I use that word outsider, and they said, and they were very, very supportive of me and what I did. They said, we don't really like that word. We see you as an ally. Oh. And that's a word I like also. So I'm an ally to a community that is not my own. And anyway, it wasn't clear what the film would be like, who would be in the film, what form it would take. It just felt like I absolutely had to try to do something. And that's what set me off.
I really, first of all, really appreciated hearing you be so honest about not knowing Muslims personally. And this is something that we all face, right? Because we all, to a very great degree, interact with our own people, right? And these are the bubbles that we occupy on a regular basis. And for the most part, it's sort of normal to do. But on the other hand, when you face a situation like this, where you realize all these communities are vulnerable in this political moment, literally vulnerable, not just in symbolic ways, but in actual, their lives are at risk, and you make an effort to reach out to them. I really found that moment very powerful. And I also really liked how you said that you weren't trying to save people, but you were, listening to voices and basically uplifting those voices because they're doing the work, right? They're doing the work and you are sort of boosting their voices, right? So I really appreciated that aspect of the film. And it came through very powerfully.
I'm a storyteller. I mean, yeah. I'm not an activist, whatever that means. I mean, I don't mean that proudly or not proudly, but I do make films about people that I admire and am intrigued by. And for people to open up to whatever degree to me, I take that as a real responsibility of how to not necessarily always show people in the most complimentary light. That's not what the criteria is, but just how to take their honesty and their intimacy and their truth, to take it as an obligation to be true to it.
Mm.
So
You know, I really love storytelling. Storytellers are, the most powerful people in our communities. Storytellers are the ones who keep our memories, keep our histories, and they keep us together. They bind us together with these stories. Without stories, we're really nothing. Like, who are we without our stories? So I really love what you said about that. So tell us a little bit about what the process was like. You were talking about cultural anthropology. I'm an anthropologist myself. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I did ethnography with Muslim American college students. And very much so, I can identify with the things that you're saying in terms of hearing stories and trying to the very best of my ability to ensure that those voices are heard. Um, and it's a difficult job. And part of the process is attaining access to the communities and gaining the trust of those communities. And especially in times of surveillance and heightened security concerns, right? So, what was your experience like reaching out to communities to make this film?
well, my experience was completely positive.
Mm,
Um, I go around, I show my film a lot, and often I'm in communities of other non-Muslims
yeah.
who statistically, most non-Muslims have not met or don't know any Muslim people individually. Most non-Muslims in America have never been in a mosque. And it was, post the election, as it perhaps as opposed to post 9/11, but at
Yeah.
least from my experience in early 2017, was a really great time to meet people in your local mosque, because most everyone I met was like,
Mm,
we're glad you're here. If you're interested, I'd love to
yeah.
talk to you. I'd love
Yeah.
to show you around, I mean, respectfully. I mean, if you
Yes.
come in confrontationally, they're not going to be happy to see you, nor
Of
should they. But
course. Of course.
I hate to generalize for people, but I heard a lot from people, both community leaders and otherwise, that they kind of felt it was their responsibility to make themselves known better to their non-Muslim neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, in America and pretty much everywhere, you can only stigmatize people and vilify people you don't know. And
Mm,
it's the lack of knowledge that really allows you to paint them in certain kind of ways.
mm,
So it was very easy in
mm,
general.
mm,
I would speak to people and they would refer me to one place, they'd refer me to another person, and I would, I can just always call people up and say, can I come out and, take you out for tea and we'll talk?
mm,
And people were open to the process.
mm.
Having said that, it was one thing to make a personal connection, say in Ozone Park, which is an area in Queens, which is very first generation Bengali neighborhood, wonderful neighborhood, but a little insular, which I
Mhm,
get. I'm not
mhm,
judging that.
mhm,
And so I had someone that really felt some affinity in the neighborhood.
mm,
Yet other people there had no idea what I was doing.
mm,
And and it was just me and my camera. It was a
mm,
small camera. I have a very small crew. It's just me.
mm.
And a lot of life in filmmaking is
Right.
showing up again and again and again. And I would go out to Queens on the subway, and some days I wouldn't film at all. I would just hang out. And some days I would film and
Mm,
nothing would come of it. And I am an editor of films. I'm not a shooter of films. I'd never shot anything before, but I
mm,
knew in making this film that I had to do it quickly. That
mm.
this was an urgency to getting the film done. And in
Right.
reality, it was anything that would make it more streamlined, which budgetarily,
Yeah.
not having to hire a cameraman made it less expensive
Sure.
and less fundraising involved.
Right.
It meant I didn't get paid, but that's okay. But it was just
Wow.
me to
Mm,
try to streamline and get it done quickly. So
mm,
I'd be going out there and other communities also, and it was I can't really introduce myself to everybody.
right. No.
Um, but after a period of time, people began to see me to the extent that,
Mm,
like there was something in Sunset Park where it was
mm,
a pre-Christmas event,
mm,
and they were having family night at the mosque, which they do once a month, and
mm,
there was food and games and all that. And
mm,
I came a little bit late, and like a number of people come up and said, I was wondering where you were, when you were going to show
Oh,
up, you know,
that's kind of
and,
sweet.
and that is sweet. So
Yeah.
I can, the period of getting to meet people and getting
Mm,
to know communities and
mm,
beginning to film
mm,
is sincerely a gift. It's like a
mm,
gift to me to get to go places I don't know. Again, I've lived in New York my whole life. It's a
mhm,
very large city.
mhm,
There were neighborhoods that I really didn't know, and there were
mhm,
lives that I didn't really know.
mm,
And
mm,
to me, part of the point of making this film
mm,
was it became clear to me over time that in showing it to my non-Muslim
mm,
fellow
mm,
non-Muslims,
mm.
that it would be a bit of a window onto a world that they didn't really know about. And not so
Yeah.
much to take it on a point of, oh, I'm going to convince Islamophobic, xenophobic people that Muslims are wonderful people.
Right. Yeah.
That's outside my ability. And I'm
Yeah.
not really, that's also my bandwidth to kind of embrace that confrontational quality.
Mm,
But I'm happy to have anyone see the film. But if people who see it who say, well, of course I'm supportive of Muslim rights, but I really don't know what who we're talking about.
mm,
People tell me after they see the film, they get a better sense of those that are around them, which
mm,
is,
mm.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
That's a get, something to get from it.
I absolutely see that, and the wonderful thing about the film that I was really relishing as I was watching was the occasional insularity of the communities. You really get a flavor for those communities, like like you start with the Bengali community, then you go to Yemeni community, you go to sort of an Algerian organization, and the wonderful cultural complexity that comes through of this community that is often essentialized as like a community in a box, right? You can just identify them by their faith, and that's all you need to know. And what you're showing shows that it's actually not true, that there is so much complexity, ideological complexity, cultural complexity, different ways that people are doing Islam as well. And I really valued that about the film. And I think that's partly the sort of the ethnographic quality of the community, of sorry, of the film, in that you're not trying to put these people in a box, because it's impossible to do that. And when people do that, it's a project. It's a there's an agenda to doing that. You can define these people, they're two-dimensional, and that's pretty much all you need to know. So for example, you have Debbie El-Montasser speaking to sort of issues of gender and segregation. You have the Indonesian gentleman speaking about gender. Then you have the other people talking about how, you know, they have sort of a segregation of genders and so on. So there's like this range, and you're not commenting on it, it's just there,
Mhm.
right?
It is all commented upon by the fact that I'm selecting what to put in, but
Of
I
course.
am interested in storytelling where you
Mm,
have to, where one is being allowed
mm,
to wade their own way through
mm,
the
mm,
story. I
mm,
certainly knew that the Muslim population in the United States of America was diverse.
mm,
I again, I won't, I will say this, but after that, I won't keep on saying I knew this before and I didn't know that. But I
mm,
did know that not all Arabs are Muslims, not all
mm,
Muslims are Arabs. Indonesia
yeah,
is the largest country. But I
yeah,
knew that many people don't know that. And I don't say that
yeah,
judgmentally,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'm not judgmental about it. I did not know that the majority of Arab Americans are not Muslim, but are Christian. I just knew that there
yes,
were some, but
yeah,
you have to
yeah,
learn as you go.
yeah,
But it was important to get that mosaic. Plus, I wanted to. I didn't want to make a film. I think a lot of people honestly do conflate
mm,
Muslim and Arab,
right,
and that's a sloppy thing, especially in New York City, where I would say the majority are
mm,
Bengali, are
mm,
far Asian or
right,
Pakistani.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
I didn't want to. I wasn't checking off boxes that I needed to
mhm.
make sure that it was encyclopedic because what couldn't be encyclopedic, but I wanted it to be kaleidoscopic to give a
I
sense
like that.
of
I really like that. That that it is really kaleidoscopic, and you're not trying to make a laundry list of different
right,
types of
right,
communities and different. You can't do that in a film,
right.
and you lose your audience as well when you're doing that. I was just talking to my students about the way I run my courses as well. That you can't do a taxonomy, right? And it's not it's not real. It's a any taxonomy isn't real anyway. It's just really an approximation. But I really appreciated, and one of the things that we struggle with in our community often is that how much visibility is given to Muslim Americans who are upper and middle class and professionals. And I really appreciated how you started with a community that was very working class,
Mhm.
a Bengali working class community. I really appreciated the sort of spotlighting of these communities, and also the diversity even within that, sort of the educational, professional diversity that people are coming from. Did you really work at that, or did that just happen?
It happened, but it did seem to need, I had this sense of wanting to be outside of my comfort zone. And when I
Mm,
say that, I don't mean that
yeah.
I don't like Muslims and I'm not comfortable being here. I just mean that,
Mhm.
to be honest, I probably am a upper middle class professional person. And um, it would be cherry picking to kind of find other people who fit that
Yeah.
parallel role.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not worrying about how this comes across. It's not that I was uncomfortable in Ozone Park. Frankly, I was like
Mm.
ecstatic being there
Right.
because it was an opportunity that I wouldn't normally have, and it is a different socioeconomic community. It's
Hmm.
first generation. A lot of
Mm.
people are not doing that well.
Yeah.
For instance, when I went to Kabir's house and he was
Yeah.
very, very welcoming, there's like 9 people living in a small house, and
Hmm.
it's a different world.
Mm.
And I'm not a trained, I don't even know what cultural anthropology literally means, but I do have a
Mm.
sense of what it means.
Hmm.
And I'm not an observer. I'm kind of like to be a participant. If I
Mm.
can give you a story, and I say this because it's something I learned. People sometimes say, well, what did you learn?
Mm.
When the film was finished, he was having a big screening in New York at a film festival, and we were going to have a little reception at my house afterwards. I live in New York. I know a lot of people.
Hmm.
And my wife said to me, do you want to invite anyone from the film? And I often appear with people from the film. And on that day, Kobir Chaudhry from Ozone
Hmm.
Park and Imam Shamsi Ali were going to be appearing with me.
Mm.
Said, do you want to invite them back afterwards? And I said, I feel kind of awkward in
Mm.
that I've been living in my apartment for a long time. And so I'm fortunate. I have a large apartment
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I live in a world that's a little different than theirs.
Hmm.
And I don't want them to be judging me.
Hmm.
And she said, well, you should sit with that and see how that feels. And
Mm.
I realized, and I think it was my son who said to me, they know who you are. You've
Mm.
already earned their trust. And I said, you're right. Anyway, Imam Shamsi couldn't come, but Kobir Chaudhry and some of his children came to my house.
Hmm.
And I was so thrilled they were there. And they were thrilled they were there. And I realized that notion of how you either categorize people or
Yeah.
kind of peg them socioeconomically, that I'm not trying to beat myself that I was as guilty as anyone else might be, but I had that kind of consciousness in my mind after
Of
the film was
course.
completely done.
Yeah.
And, I was very glad they were there, and it was a lovely day. So it was just a
Yeah.
funny experience.
Yeah, yeah. It is it just reminds you of some of the ways that we, become divided from other people on in various ways, right? Whether it's by class or by culture or by and the other thing that I really liked, especially, was what you mentioned about them being first generation, because a lot of people will feel very comfortable speaking to and of second, no, I mean, whatever the term is, like American born
Mhm.
people of immigrant background, or people who have been here for quite some time, but not sort of the refugee populations, which you also talked about and emphasized, and the struggles that they face, but also the sort of the grace and the courage with which they face it, and the solidarity, right? The solidarity that brings them through. So the gentleman Bahi, his last name was Bahi, yeah. So their work and the sort of the heart that goes into that kind of work, I really appreciated bringing that up. Sort of that solidarity, the community solidarity, and
Mm.
the uplifting. People are just pooling together bits of cash to support. their refugee brothers and sisters.
Right. At the same time that I was having a very rewarding experience meeting people, the first day that I shot for the film
Mm.
was on January 21st, 2017, which was the Women's March in Washington, day after the
Right.
inauguration.
Yep.
4 years ago from today. And literally,
It's a long, long 4 years.
yeah. And I had the idea that maybe I'd use the Women's March as because it was going to be a big protest, as a kind of a timestamp to start the
Uh-huh.
film. And,
Uh,
and I was looking for a group of Muslim people going down there. And
mm,
I was introduced to a group in Queens called Women for Afghan Women. Fantastic
mm,
organization.
mm,
And they said, yeah, we're taking a bus. Come on, come along the bus. And I was the only man on the bus.
mm,
And most people were first generation.
mm,
And it was amazing. It was amazing. A lot of these people were undocumented and never left Queens. It was an amazing. None of it ended up in
mm,
the film, but I had an
mhm, mhm,
amazing experience.
mm,
Point being, that it was just 5 days later
mm,
that the Muslim ban
mm,
was enacted,
mm,
and things were happening at such a fast pace,
mm,
so that the Muslim ban obviously was kind of a framing device of the film. But I had no idea. I assumed to be thrown out of court within a couple of weeks. But on a larger level, the notion of Muslim bashing and of immigrant bashing that was going on from the administration was everywhere in the streets. There were protests all the time about it, about
yeah.
DACA, about other immigrant issues. And that, I didn't, there's a tendency. I was very glad to be at the events that I was at, and to some degree, as a filmmaker, they begin to cancel each other out because they're uplifting and activating, but they're not in and of themselves that different from each other. But
Mm,
I think that was just an indicator of how the immigrant issue and the immigration issue just had
mm,
to be front and center.
mm,
And as it says at the beginning of the film, the Muslim American community is very fast growing, but it's also a very young
it
American
is.
community.
Yeah.
I think the amount is 60% of the Muslims in America are first generation, or came from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So that really is a defining
Mm,
element, and
mm,
makes it very vulnerable when you
mm.
have that spirit in the landscape going on,
Yeah.
politically.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really, I mean, the history of the Muslim American community, or Muslims in America, is just a fascinating one. We have a course at AIC on Islam in America, and we trace it, from the time that Africans are brought and enslaved here in the United States, well, before the United States, but in America, and struggling to live Muslim lives, struggling to kind of maintain their religion. So it goes further back than most of us know. But yeah, so the bulk of the Muslim American community is actually Black, and is, for many generations has been here. But yeah, the immigrant community, definitely there are many sort of segments of that are very, very young, very recent in the United States. And so the Muslim ban was really a traumatic, very traumatic time. I still remember the night when, after the election, that I really couldn't sleep at that point. I was just, obsessively following the election results, and just like my heart was going into my boots, and I just could not handle the thought of what the future was going to look like. And I know many sort of organizations, organizers, communities, regular folks who have worked so hard. Right here at O'Hare, we had a huge, like, O'Hare was completely overrun with pro bono lawyers and community members, Muslims, non-Muslims, everybody just like standing firm, right, with their Muslim neighbors, and saying, absolutely, we are not going to stand for this, right, and fighting. I have a cousin who was doing the same thing over there at Dulles, and it was a beautiful but a terrible time, right?
Well, that's a
And
good thing to
so,
bring
yeah,
up, a beautiful and
yeah,
terrible time. My grandmother used to
yeah,
talk about,
yeah,
at bad times, good things can happen.
yeah.
You said that at my great aunt's funeral that everybody came together, and
Yeah.
it's sad, but we were all glad to be together.
Yeah.
I don't want to paint too either rosy or simplistic a paint it with that kind of brush,
Yeah.
but I do think that the last 4 years have been a really fertile opportunity for a lot of interfaith alliance that had already been in the works for quite some time.
Mm.
And a lot of partnerships were forged
Mm.
that I'm interested to see what will happen now in a less antagonistic environment. And when I say antagonistic,
Yes. Yeah.
certainly
Yeah.
I wouldn't think anybody would think that Islamophobia has gone away with Trump,
No,
but
God, no. Yeah.
at
But
all,
yeah.
recently so. But
Yeah. Yeah.
some of the government approved,
Yeah.
targeting has, and
Yeah.
it was a very powerful thing. I mean, I think here at JFK Airport, the night of the
Mm.
ban was the
Yeah.
outpouring of people.
Yeah.
And certainly there were events along the way where there was Debbie Almontazer and a small number of other people,
Right.
but she would be the first to say that the
Yeah.
alliances that have been built in the community
Right.
outside of the Muslim community are very, very strong. And
So strong.
I was, there's like within the Jewish community,
Mm-hmm.
to some degree, again, it's a conflation of Muslim and Arab.
Mm.
There's assumption of animosity, but in fact,
Mm.
right after the election, there were so many more alliances being built, and people
True.
at every single demonstration of which I was at many, there were always interfaith representatives
Yeah. Yeah.
there from
Yeah.
the Jewish community, from other places. And I would
Mm.
hope that these alliances, and they will,
Mm.
whomever is leading, will be able to funnel their energies in many directions now.
Yeah, yeah. So
I would
this is
say for me,
what I hope as well. Given that we have, very often when we deal with these things, and then we're like, oh, great, the Muslim ban is over, Trump is gone, great, now we can go back to sleep, right? And the thing is that we cannot. This victory in the election for the Democratic Party was actually a very hard one victory, won by Black voters, by organizers, youth, volunteers, with a lot of hard work. And then we still have midterms, right? So all of that can go away very easily. And so the important thing is for people to remain connected. And I think the solidarities part that you're talking about, the community solidarity part, is the most important thing for me. That we cannot do these things alone. Mariam Kaba, one of my I really look up to her as a sort of a theorist of like freedom and like abolition, and she talks about how without people we are nothing, right? And so the important thing is to remain our communities to remain connected and to remain in solidarity, that without solidarity with other communities we are nothing. And the Jewish community has been in the United States very connected to these sort of liberation struggles, these sort of left-oriented struggles, political left-oriented struggles, the civil rights movement. They've been very active so I think that we can always learn from each other in our communities, and I think that reinventing the wheel is not not a good use of time. And I always benefit from speaking to my friends in other communities and learning from them in this way. So is there anything else about the making of the film or the process of the film that really I know I have other things as well that I'm thinking about in terms of sort of uh, what people were talking about in terms of proving their Americanness. I think that really struck me
mm,
and this is very specific to particular cultural moments. I remember right after 9/11, and you and I are old enough to remember those moments, but some of our students are not. But I remember right after 9/11, there was this outpouring of let's prove how American we are. Let's prove how we are, sort of almost like a disassociation from our communities, almost like a kind of like our communities are so stigmatized that the best thing we can do is like drape ourselves in American flags
mm.
and like pretend that that's pretty much all we are. Did you see, like, what did you think of that?
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, I live about a mile from the World Trade Center site,
Mm, mm,
and I wasn't endangered at all that day
Sure. Yeah.
personally, but it was horrifying. I mean, we were in the area
Was
that was
a
locked
yeah.
down. You couldn't come and go. And
Yeah.
for everybody who lives here in New York and everywhere, it was a very
Yeah.
traumatic
It was.
time.
It was. Of
And
course.
I will admit that while I knew a lot of cases of Middle Eastern people and even Sikhs, being persecuted, which is like
Mm.
absurd, but
Yeah. And then the
you know,
shooting at the
bigotry is blind
at the
and
temple at the
stupid.
Gurdwara. Yeah.
Um, I don't think I quite made the connection because it wasn't my experience of
Yeah.
how apocalyptic it was
Mm.
for various Middle Eastern and Muslim communities after
Right.
9/11.
Yeah.
And for me, in terms of the way I tell stories,
Mhm.
like I went into this saying, okay, I want to give voice
Mhm.
to this community, I want to, like what's going on.
Mhm.
But in the process of talking to people, a number of people told me how
Mm.
significant 9/11 was for them within the Muslim community. And I said,
Yeah.
okay, well, I have to explore this.
Yeah.
And when I was speaking to Abir Kawas, the Palestinian American
Yes. Yeah.
young woman whose father was apprehended and was ultimately was deported and
That
can
was a terrible story for me
he
when
never come
I
back.
yeah.
And
Just to grow up like that and your father you come home and your father's gone and that's it.
yeah, so that's just stunning to me,
Yeah.
and was very painful to hear that, and for Beer to find a way to channel that energy and to channel
Mm.
that experience,
Mhm.
and to kind of have it come anew again within the Muslim band, and how personal that feels
Yeah.
to her from having gone through that. That was very powerful to me
Yeah.
to hear
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
and I can't say that I really understood the community from that aspect of how, what that did
Yeah.
previously.
Yeah, it is. So when you see somebody like that who's been traumatized, personally traumatized in their life by an event like this, people were deported. So many people were deported. So many people were pulled in for questioning, and so many people also, my friend tells me, self-deported because they were afraid of being pulled in, being sent to Guantanamo. Like there was no real legality to pretty much anything that was happening at that time for to Muslim Americans. Even now, we have people in the Guantanamo prison that are never been processed, no guilt, just they have always claimed, so there's no legality to any of this stuff that's happening. And then you have an event like this again, right? And you put yourself into sort of a community work, solidarity, a service of a community, and that's beautiful. But at the same time, that's carrying the trauma, right? That's so much trauma that you're also carrying in your body, in your family. And I really respect it, but at the same time, it just breaks my heart as well that a person's life should be shaped so entirely by that kind of trauma.
Yeah, we talked about the notion of having to prove your Americanness.
Yeah.
Um, when I met Kabir Chaudhry, who again is first generation and
Mm.
is how to say this, he's certainly a smart man and he graduated college, but he's from a different intellectual
Mm-hmm.
area or landscape than I am.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also a first generation. And he said to me, he spoke really eloquently about being American and like
Mm-hmm.
being so upset and so disappointed
Mm-hmm.
because of his commitment to America. And as a third generation American, I'd be the first to say I take these things for granted. It's where I'm from,
Mm.
period. I don't mean to say I belittle it, but it's not something I ever question. It's
Right.
where my grandparents were born.
Right.
And I do think it's a luxury or just a natural byproduct of having
Yeah.
been here for a while. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I think that was a component for many people. And I saw, and it's in the film, the scene where there had been a Bengali American who had tried to detonate a bomb in Times Square. And I think this was in 2017,
That's
2018.
right. That's right. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all foggy to me now. I forget
It
whether
is now.
were killed or not. I think he was unsuccessful, but
Yeah.
they all had to denounce
Yeah. The
it.
condemnations.
And and later in speaking to, well, actually, Debbie Almendoza told me previously, I'm tired of being asked to denounce people. there's no reason I should have to denounce anyone.
Yeah.
I have nothing to do with them. That's not the
Yeah.
Islam that I practice. It's a guilt by association that's rude for people to have that expectation.
Right.
And, that is something that people have to navigate in different ways.
Yeah, yeah. And this is also very, that response is very much a product of a particular historical period. So after 9/11, we took for granted that we had to issue condemnations constantly, right? There was never any question that we should not, right? And it only took some time after like continuously condemning, explaining, defining, self-defining, and then eventually realizing that it did not apply, the same standard did not apply to others. So for example, people, white supremacists can break into the Capitol and they are, the police treat them a very different way, Capitol Police treat them a very different way. They don't have to explain, right? Their criticality of the government is not something that needs an explanation, but some populations do not have the luxury of criticality, right? So why don't I refuse that. I'm not accepting that burden. I am going to be critical no matter what, right? So yes, it's a very, but even when I say that, I'm also the product of a particular time. I could not have said this immediately after 9/11. So very much aware of that. I see we have a couple of questions coming here. So Andrew Milowski says, my question for Adam, can you talk about including Khader al-Yatim in the film? What was the importance of including his story as a Palestinian Christian in the film? How did you connect with him and his running for city council?
Well, Father K, as he's known, is really a remarkable person.
Sorry, there's someone's audio is on. Could you kindly
I
turn?
think it's Azadine.
Sorry,
It's Khader
Yeah,
al-Yatim?
hello. Please, if you could kindly mute. Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
Father K, who is a Palestinian Lutheran minister, and a real figure in the community that everybody has bonded around. And he was running for city council, which was an amazing story that was covered by, there was a short, 2 other documentary films made about Father K. There was a Radio Lab piece on This American Life about Father K.
Oh.
He was very progressive, and he was, New York City is an interesting place. Most neighborhoods have ethnic complexities. Bay Ridge, which actually is an area far out in Brooklyn where my mother was born and grew up, used to be a very white Irish Catholic Italian neighborhood, and now it's the largest concentration of Arab American population in the city, and without representation. And Father K was running for office. The reason it was interesting to me was Father K was not a Muslim person running for office. He was an Arab American. And Abir Kawas was very, very committed to his campaign and was lobbying for him constantly and campaigning. And I went out there filming her. And I was interested in Abir because she was a young community organizer. And I kind of thought of her as opposed to a Debbie Almentozer, who's a seasoned veteran activist and is well known, is the kind of person that like the national talk shows might look for a soundbite for about Arab, Muslim American issues.
Absolutely.
Kawas was 25 when I met her, and she was, very active in her world, but as a different generation. And as a community organizer, that's different than electoral politics. And I was a little late to the game to the Father K story, but it was really interesting what was happening in Bay Ridge. And I think one thing that happened because of Trump's winning, because of the Muslim ban, because of immigration policies that were targeting this community, the Muslim community in general, and all immigrant communities, it was very activating. And Abir says that in the film. People used to be able to say, oh, that has nothing to do with me. But now they're getting riled up because it is impacting them personally. And in fact, Muslim American community by the voting polls haven't really, those who are citizens haven't voted at a very high level. And many organizations had an enormous drive to turn out Muslim American votes. And in fact, in the year 2020, in this past election,
Yeah.
twice as many Muslim Americans voted as did vote in 2016. The population had
Mm.
grown, more people were citizens, but still, that's an
Yeah.
enormous difference. So
Yes.
Father K was representative in a way of people getting engaged and getting involved here on the local level of
Right.
trying to get representation, because without
Yes.
representation in politics, you can't do anything.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you're absolutely right. Also, in emphasizing and highlighting the difference between electoral politics and community organizing. Right. So, electoral politics, so obviously, they come along every now and again, but that doesn't mean that we don't organize during that time. Between that, before that, that we don't get organized, that we don't get involved in sort of community, local politics, and so on, uplifting the community, and so on. But a lot of people think that it's only about presidential elections, that really that's the only important thing. But our community organizing is really the some of the most important things that we can absolutely do. I see there's a question actually about Catholic engagement. Eileen Smith asked the question. She says that I love the movie Being Born in Queens, Married to a Jewish Man. It really resonated. I particularly loved the interfaith components. Were there any Catholic communities engaged in dialogue or joint activism other than nuns? And here in Chicago, I struggle with a reluctance to do a deeper dive beyond words because of theology. Hmm.
Um, I was born in Queens,
Mm-hmm.
and and Queens is, if New York is the most, which I assume it must be the most diverse city in America, then Queens is the most diverse county in America. It's extraordinary. I believe, I'm pulling this out of the air, I believe there's 117 languages spoken as principal languages in
Amazing.
Queens. It's an amazing place.
Such an
Um,
amazing
of
place. Mm.
course, there was
Yeah.
Christian involvement and Catholic involvement. I will
Mm.
say Christian, I can't necessarily parse it out as to Catholic or not.
Mm-hmm.
Interfaith alliance with the Muslim community that was ongoing.
Mm.
It seemed that it kind of fell in my lap a little bit more, some of the Jewish component of it. And
Sure.
I don't think I sought it out per se because I'm Jewish. It
Mm-hmm.
just seemed to present itself
Mm-hmm.
to me,
Mm-hmm.
so that the Jewish group congregation Beit Simchat Torah, where you see, and they've been connected to the Islamic Center at NYU for years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And they would be going there, and until, I don't know if they still do or not, they were there every Friday for the principal prayer, being outside, greeting people coming in.
Mm.
So there were a lot of examples that I encountered that were from Jewish people, but they were definitely, I would be the first to say that there's a number of Christian groups and Catholic groups that are the main charitable organization working for refugee placement here in the New York area, particularly in
Yeah.
New Jersey. So there's no shortage at all. If I gave short shrift
Mm-hmm.
by screen time, it wasn't
Mm.
intentional at all. So there's a
Sure.
lot of interfaith alliance. And I'd also be the first to say it's been interesting to me.
Mm.
I mean, I've been Jewish my whole life. I'm very comfortable in that context.
Mm-hmm.
I'm increasingly comfortable in the Muslim, world, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And it was easier for me as I was creating interfaith
Mm.
screenings with the film, which is something I actively do, to bring Jewish and Muslim groups together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm perfectly happy to do that with church communities. They're just not as familiar to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had a couple of, back when we met in person before, a year ago. Now we don't meet in person, but I had a couple of events that were housed by
Mm-hmm.
churches that were amazing, between churches and synagogues and mosques,
Yeah.
that were really empowering. And I was really excited by what was happening and what I was able to bring about
Mm-hmm.
with these interfaith events. And I'm in no way am I
Mm.
claiming that I was inventing something. There's
Mm.
interfaith activities all over this country, as well as there should
Of
be,
course. Of
but there's
course.
always room for more. And
Absolutely.
having a film that was a bit of a vehicle to kind of enter into from different ways was a great
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
So
And that
there,
doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of a story as well. It's sort
sure,
of opening a
sure.
door. And I know how, like research filmmaking is, there's a snowball process, right? So you meet up with people who can connect you with other people, and that doesn't necessarily mean that other people aren't there. It's just that you happen to come into contact with people. I see Sarah Trum commented that for Muhammad in the film, the moment of decision about identity came after 9/11. So that's another interesting thing that we were talking about, how people were essentially forced to, in a way, confront identity, that this person who was otherwise not necessarily very aware of their religious background, uh, were made more aware of their background. And it's like in this country, this country has a long history of of racism against new immigrants, and a variety of Jews, Poles, the Irish. There's a long history of different waves of immigration that faced severe forms of both racism and oppression in this country, and sort of also the assumptions that you would shed everything that you had, sort of your languages, your cultures, everything would be quickly shed. You would lose them, and otherwise you would not be properly American, right? I like to give the example to my Muslim students often of Chaim Potok's novel, The Chosen, where baseball kind of serves that purpose, right? At that time, baseball serves the purpose of making these new European Jews American, right? So you play baseball, and that makes you more American in a way, because you face this constant anti-Semitism in society, which is colored also by the sense of kind of being foreign and Eastern European, or otherwise. So it's kind of interesting how racism takes different forms and towards different communities at different times.
The example that Mohammed Bai gives in the film is actually really interesting because he came here, I believe, when he was 10, 9, something like that, from Algeria.
Mm.
And he grew up in Queens, again, very
Mhm.
multicultural and diverse. And
Mm.
he, had a lot of friends, and he played football, and he was called Big Mo. And
Yeah.
right after 9/11, people started calling him Muhammad and saying, what do you have to say about Islam? And he said, yeah, and he never thought about it.
Yeah.
It's something he never had to think about. And in essence,
Mm.
that started him on a journey of
Mm-hmm.
discovering his Muslim identity.
Mm.
Um, that might or might not have happened in the same way
Yeah.
otherwise. It's an interesting turn of
Yeah.
events for him.
Yeah, it's almost like a sort of a dynamic process of people tell you what you are,
Right.
and you are forced to kind of put that on more than usual. So it is really interesting that sort of dynamic, interactive process almost of identification. I see somebody has asked the question that did you notice similarities or connections between the youth or the children of different ethnic Muslim communities in New York City? Are these Muslim communities becoming more connected with each other? So,
Mhm.
for example, you notice the Indonesian community and the Bangladeshi community and so on. Did you find, I know you mentioned that there was some insularity,
Mhm.
uh, but did you notice that after, say, the Muslim ban and these other kind of forms of activism and organizing, that there was more traffic between them?
I would be,
It's hard to say, right?
it's a little hard to say.
Yeah.
People, we have a joke in Judaism,
Mhm.
which is, I'll do it very quickly. Guy's on a desert island, and
Mm.
he finally gets saved after all these years, and the TV crews come, and he's living alone on this island, and they they say, well, how did you live? How did you eat? How did you do this? And he's showing them around the island, and they said, well, I have one question. You have two synagogues here. You're only one. Why would you have two synagogues? Why'd you build two synagogues? He said, I'm glad you asked that. That's the synagogue I pray in, and that's the synagogue I won't set foot in. So they don't need to be Jewish in that
This
story.
is very familiar.
Right. So I think it crosses all cultures. And,
That's hilarious.
and the point I'm taking that is not that there's animosity between mosques, but what it is,
Yeah.
there's a lot of cultural specificity. Of course,
Yes.
every Muslim's invited anywhere,
Yeah.
just as any Jewish person invited to any synagogue,
Yeah.
but more so in the Muslim community because they came from specifically
Yeah.
different countries. So you
Yeah.
might have a Pakistani
Sure.
mosque or an Egyptian mosque, and there will be people there that are not Egyptian, but it has a
Yeah.
certain cultural flavor
Yeah.
that's very different.
Yeah.
The Indonesian community here is very large.
Yeah.
and there aren't too many people in the Indonesian mosques that are not Indonesian, and it's
Sure.
in no way
Yeah.
that they're not open to other people.
Sure.
But culturally, it's different. There is
Yeah.
more intermixing of genders. A lot of things that about Indonesian
Yeah.
food, about Indonesian music.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense that there would be both separation,
Mm-hmm.
but in
Mm-hmm.
times when you need alliances, of course, people have a lot in common.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
it was very interesting to me to note the differences of the Indonesian mosque versus the Arab American mosque. They're very
Yeah.
totally different places.
The
And
wedding was beautiful, by the way. That
oh my
wedding
gosh, it's
in
so
the so
beautiful.
beautiful.
You know,
I
the people
just
are
like
so,
stunning.
yeah, it is
I
stunning. And
really love Indonesian culture. There's something about it. I really love Indonesian and Malaysian culture. Southeast Asian cultures are just really really fascinating to me. Yeah.
there's a scene I filmed which didn't end up using in the film, but it was very interesting because Imam Shamsi Ali,
Mm-hmm.
who is a world figure, like
Mm,
he's traveled all over the world. He's a
mm,
very well regarded figure.
mm,
And his mission, if you will, is besides interfaith work, is to change the image of Islam in America and
okay.
Islam around the world as being something from the Middle East, because it's not.
Ah,
It is
yes,
from,
exactly.
it's not
Yeah.
represented by.
Yeah.
And so his foundation bought a property of land in Connecticut, about 2 hours from New York in the
Mm,
country.
mm,
And they were going to build a school, a summer camp, various cultural programs, and they were
mm,
developing it.
mm,
And during Ramadan, I went up there. He invited me up. They were going to have an interfaith iftar
mhm,
for the community as an opportunity for people to get to know them. So we're in
mm,
Connecticut. Out in the country, they have probably not met many Muslims up there, right? There's just not been
mm,
an opportunity for that. And
right.
Shamsi Ali was the gentlest and kindest and most welcoming people. And
Mm,
he was really excited at the opportunity to get his neighbors to come to know them. And he also wanted them to, so they wouldn't be threatened by this.
right.
What are these people doing here?
Yeah.
He said right up front, as he spoke to everyone, I'm
Mm,
so glad you're here.
mm,
You know, if you're a Christian, I'm very happy. Be a good Christian. That's what I want you to do.
mm, mm,
We don't want anyone, we're not trying to convert anybody.
right. Right.
You have your religion, that's wonderful. We have our religion, that's wonderful. We can all
Yeah.
meet. But it was a wonderful scene because the people looked very, how to say, Connecticut-y. And, and it
That's
wasn't
so New York. You're right.
how to say, very non-urban setting, it's a very pastoral setting. And
Yeah.
it was this wonderful opportunity. It was an iftar with amazing food, and
Yeah. Indonesian
everyone was
food.
mingling, eating the Indonesian food, and seeing
Yeah.
everybody all decked out. It was
Mm,
great.
yeah.
I can't speak one way or the other as to how much has gone on there
Mm,
afterwards, but I hope that it continues and
I certainly
that
do.
site will be a real source of connectivity for the community.
Yeah. Yeah. This was
Okay,
wonderful.
sorry,
Yeah.
we're almost out of time, so I'm
That's
just
right.
going to ask our guests to put in their last minute thoughts and questions in the chat box. And I also would like to ask a question.
Mm,
Um, so right after Trump won the election, I went to work and I received a phone call from someone calling from Wisconsin, and he identified himself as a white male and Christian. And he said, I voted for Trump, but I don't know much about your community and your faith.
mm.
And he said, I know that Muslims go to synagogue, which I thought was
Sure. Why
There's a
not?
lot.
it was cute because we're
Yeah.
cousins, we're
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. Yeah. We are.
But
Yeah.
he really genuinely, like, he didn't know. And you know and that a lot of, not everyone, I'm sure, but a lot of supporters don't are
Mhm.
anti-Muslim or anti-Jewish or anti-Black or anti-Latino or what have you. But I really appreciated this conversation because um, I guess he could see where that would be the understanding when he voted for him, and he wanted to know, he wanted to get educated. I'm just
Mm,
wondering if you had any conversations like that, particularly around the film, with folks who self-identified as, hey, I voted for Trump, or hey, I don't know much about Islam and I watched your film,
mm,
um, and it had a positive impact on me, and also any backlash that you may have received
yeah.
from the film.
Mhm. Well, I'd be the first to say that I tend to show the film to audiences that are probably positively disposed. And I wish that weren't only the case, but actually, I only have so much bandwidth. I mean, it's the notion, um, for what it's worth, I do think it's a problem in this country. Frankly, everyone I talk to, and I mean this, everyone that is in my social circle generally agrees with me politically. And that's not healthy. It's not the way it should be.
Yeah.
Having said that,
Yeah.
I have a line in the sand when it comes to hatred and bigotry. And and if that's where you're coming from, there's nothing to talk about. I mean, there really isn't. Having said that, if there was a way there was some nuance, I mean, what you're speaking about, Ramon, is someone who doesn't know and is really interested in knowing more. I'm like completely on board for that, whatever the subject is. When I was in Florida, not to paint Florida with a broad stroke, actually it was there right at when I shouldn't have been. It was like the pandemic was just about to start, but we did an event at a church, and there was a church and a Muslim group and a synagogue came together. And I was warned ahead of time that some of the people there, and the first person I met who was from the church was talking about, oh, you may not like Trump, but my 401k is doing fantastic. He's all okay by my book. And I'm a little strident and I try to be diplomatic and not to pick fights with people in inappropriate times. But it gave me an inkling there were some people that weren't entirely on board, right? Um, and, there was no backlash. That's like a bit harsh because people aren't going to come out for an event that's called American Muslim if they don't feel positively disposed. I would say that perhaps, and I'd be the first to poke fingers in my own community, is that there are people in the Jewish community that are very anti-Arabic, that are very, especially, now I'm being the one who's like painting, but more so in the Orthodox communities, there are people that are not very progressive. And I wouldn't say necessarily, I wouldn't know if they're Islamophobic, or they may be, but they're certainly, when it comes to Israel, anti-Arabic because Middle Eastern because of where that's coming from. And I occasionally ran into people who were comfortable enough expressing their ignorance to me, other Jewish people about, well, how can you make a film about them when all the horrible things they do? So wait a minute. Or how can you make a film when that's the way they treat women? I said, well, what are you talking? Let's talk about this. Let's unpack this some. So again, I'm really pleased when people tell me, which I get a lot, honestly, that from non-Muslim viewers, that I really learned a lot. Not that, I'd be uncomfortable being the spokesperson for this, but I could tell you about the 5 tenets of Islam, and I could tell you about what happened in Mecca. I could tell you those things, and I choose not to. But it's not that they learned those things. They learned that their neighbors are just like them, but different, and that's really what I wanted to know. And I'm actually pleased that people tell me that they really appreciated the scenes at Eid when there's 5,000 people praying and watching people pray, that was actually moving to them. When I felt perhaps I would be force feeding that experience, but it's a large part of the experience. So, I'm not a proselytizer, but basically the more we all know each other is a much better thing. And if I can make a small contribution to that, I'm really happy with that.
It's
So
a
I don't know if
beautiful
I answered your
contribution.
question.
Yeah, and that was this film is a beautiful contribution, I think, to our country and to the state of discourse in our country. And I think absolutely you're right in that the more solidarity, the more we can connect with our communities, the better. So
Well, I
thank
can
you
just make
so much. Yeah.
a small pitch. So the film is,
Oh,
the
yeah.
website for the film is americanmuslimfilm.com. Or if you search Adam Zucker Muslim, it'll probably come up also. There you can contact me. I can make thank you very much, Ramona. I can make the film available. I do a lot of screenings like this in communities. If you want to pursue that, let me know. The film is on Canopy, which is, depending on where you live, is available to many people through the library system. It'll probably be on Amazon and iTunes later this year. I have a distributor that handles it educationally, and we're doing more educational things at first. But if you want to pursue the film in any way, get in touch with me directly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was
Um,
a pleasure.
Same here for sure.
yes, and a lot of I don't know if you had a chance to read the chat box, but a lot of positive comments regarding the film. That it's thought provoking. It was very much appreciated, and um, they learned a lot. And ditto. We all feel that way, and so thank you so much for filming this, and we look forward to more of your work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to your college. I'm glad to be here. I wish I could be there in person, but we do what we can right now. Stay
Yes.
safe.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for your time, and thank you, Dr. Shabana, as well. This was a great discussion. We really
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Thank
Um,
you.
and for our guests, thank you for participating. You all will receive an email from me that has like a feedback form for this event, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. So thank you all, and stay tuned for more events from American Islamic College.
Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.